Getting this out of the way. Get rid of those ads. What? You can start ads this time. Start ads now. Yes, I'm trying to get the ads out of the way so you guys don't have to watch them. Ba, 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 da, ba. I really don't want the ads to interrupt the stream. Why does it say ending? That is just wonky all over the place. You know what? Screw it. We're going to chatting. So here we are. It is Thursday again. Another night for the thrilling adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Though I have to admit, I'm a little down today. Someone actually gave me a dislike. Now, normally it wouldn't bother me, but the fact that on YouTube you have to actually hit dislike on purpose, it is so weird that someone would take the time to do that. I mean, how many do that really? Someone also gave my alternate tab a subscription, which I think is amusing as hell. But hey, that is how things go. But let's see, wait a little while before we get into the reading, because as normal followers will know, I usually do not start reading until 10 minutes after the hour. Okay. What was that? Oh. Well, nice of you to actually post stream elements. And you do have the right information for once. Nice, nice. Did you also post a Twitter? I have not updated the Twitter message. I need to do that. I'll have to remember how to do that because I honestly don't know off the top of my head. Welcome in, Guilty. Hey, Wolvie. I do try to find good stories, but I just get them from the books I have. It is cold today. At least I'm not getting snow down here. Let's see. It seems Phosabot's not doing its job as usual. Let's see if I can get those shoutouts working. Oh, after I post it, then it decides, hey, let's actually acknowledge. Go ahead and shout out Wolvie Pup too. Provided I typed it right. Did I type it right? I did type right. Now, Guilty, if you don't know, Wolvie Pup usually streams more on YouTube. I don't get to catch her as often as I would like to, but I try. I don't catch streams on YouTube nearly as often as I would like to. I don't think I follow you on Instagram yet. Should fix that. Well, guilty wolves do, find each other eventually. Let's see. Good. Let's see if it'll let me do this. Oh. What the heck? Oh. My computer is such a pain sometimes. But if you don't follow her yet on YouTube, Guilty, go give her a subscribe, because plays lots of Pokemon, and it's fun to watch. Let's see. 909. I should probably get over to my reading screen here in a second. Alright. No problem, Wolvie. Let me get over to my good old reading screen for Sherlock Holmes. There we go.
There's something I have to
No, thank you.
I can't hold it any longer. I've fallen in love with thriftbooks.com.
Oh, crap.
Millions of new and used books
Under
under
$5.
we can have it all.
saw that ad because it was actually for the bookstore that I get most of my books from. I didn't think I'd see a thrift books ad pop up in my audio track, though. But yeah, a lot of my older books I get from thriftbooks.com. In fact, I bought all of my Wizard of Oz books that I have so far from them, so. But it is time for Sherlock Holmes. Sounds more like it's time for me to blow my nose, then get into Sherlock Holmes. The only downside of cold weather. But anyway, our first story for this evening. The Adventure of the Beryl Coronet. "Holmes," said I as I stood one morning in our bow window looking down on the street, "here's a madman coming along. It seems rather sad that his relatives should allow him to come out alone." My friend rose lazily from his armchair and stood with his hands in his pockets at the side of his dressing gown, looking over my shoulder. It was a bright, crisp February morning, and the snow of the day before still lay deep upon the ground, shimmering brightly in the wintry sun. Down the center of Baker Street it had been ploughed into a brown, crumbly band by the traffic, but at either side and at the heaped-up edges of the footpaths it still lay as white as when it fell. The grey pavement had been cleaned and scraped, but it was still dangerously slippy, so that there were fewer passengers than usual. Indeed, from the direction of the Metropolitan Station, no one was coming save for a single gentleman whose eccentric conduct had drawn my attention. He was a man about 50, tall, portly, and imposing, with a massive, strongly marked face and a commanding figure. He was dressed in a sombre yet rich style, in black frock coat, shining hat, neat brown gaiters, and a well-cut pearl-grey trousers. Yet his actions were absurd contrast to the dignity of his dress and features, for he was running hard, with the occasional little springs, such as a weary man gives who is a little accustomed to set any tax upon his legs. As he ran, he jerked his hands up and down, waggled his head, and writhed his face into the most extraordinary contortions. "What on earth is the matter with him?" I asked. "He is looking up the numbers of the houses." "I believe that he is coming here," said Holmes, rubbing his hands. "Here?" "Yes, I rather think he is coming to consult me professionally. I think that I recognize the symptoms. Ha! Did I not tell you?" As he spoke, the man, pulling and blowing, rushed at our door and pulled our bell until the whole house resounded with the clanging. A few moments later he was in our room, still puffing and gesticulating, but with so fixed a look of grief and despair in his eyes that our smiles were turned into an instant horror and pity. Hi, Riley. For a while he could not get his words out, but swayed his body and plucked at his hair like no one had been driven to the extreme limits of his reason. Then, suddenly springing to his feet, he beat his head against the wall with such force that we both rushed upon him and tore him to the center of the room. Sherlock Holmes pushed him down into the easy-chair and, sitting beside him, patted his head and chatted with him in easy, soothing tones which he knew so well how to employ. You have come to me to tell your story, have you not? He said. You are fatigued with your haste. Pray wait until you have recovered yourself, and then I shall be most happy to look into any problem which you may submit to me. The man sat for a minute, or more, in a heaving chest, fighting against his emotions. Then he passed his handkerchief over his brow, set his lips tight, and turned his face towards us. You no doubt think me mad, he said. I see that you have come to some great trouble, responded Holmes. God knows I have. Trouble which is enough to unseat my reason, so sudden and so terrible it is. Public disgrace I might have faced, although I am a man whose character has never yet borne a stain. Public affliction is also the lot of every man, but the two coming together, and in so frightful a form, have been enough to shake my very soul. Besides, it is not I alone. The very noblest in the land may suffer unless some way be found out of this horrible affair. Pray compose yourself, sir, said Holmes, and let me have a clear account of who you are and what it is that has befallen you. My name, answered our visitor, is probably familiar to your ears. I'm Alexander Holder, of the banking firm of Holder and Stevenson, of Threadneedle Street. The name was indeed well known to us as belonging to a senior partner in the second largest private banking concern in the city of London. What could have happened, then, to bring one of the foremost citizens of London to this most pitiable pass? We waited, all curiosity, until another effort he braced himself to tell his story. I feel that time is of value, he said. That is why I hastened here when the police inspector suggested that I should secure your cooperation. I came to Baker Street by the Underground and hurried from there on foot, for the cabs go slowly through the snow. That is why I am a little out of breath, for I am a man who takes very little exercise. I feel better now, and I will put on facts before you shortly, and yet as clearly as I can. It is, of course, well known to you that a successful banking business as much depends on being able to find your remunerate investments on your funds as upon increasing our connection and the number of our depositors. One of our most lucrative means of laying out money is in the shape of loans, where the security is unimpeachable. We have done a great deal in this direction during the last 4 years, and there are many noble families to whom we have advanced large sums of money and security upon their pictures, libraries, and plate. Yesterday morning I was seated in my office at the bank when a card was brought to me in one of the clerks. I started when I saw the name, for it was that of none other than, well, perhaps even to you I had better say no more than that it was a name which is a household word all over the earth, one of the highest, noblest, most exalted names in all of England. I was overwhelmed by the honor and attempted, when he entered, to say so, but he plunged at once into business with an air of a man who wishes to hurry quickly through a disagreeable task. Mr. Holder, he said, I have been informed that you are in the habit of advancing money. The firm do so when the security is good, I answered. It is absolutely essential to me, he said, that I should have £50,000 at once. I could, of course, borrow so trifling a sum of 10 times that from my friends, but I much prefer to make it a matter of business to carry out that business myself. In my position, you can readily understand that it is unwise to place oneself under obligations. For how long, may I ask, do you want the sum? I asked. Next Monday I have a large sum due to me, and I shall then most certainly repay you what you advance, with whatever interest you think it might be right to charge. But it is very essential to me that the money should be paid all at once. I should be happy to advance it without further parley from my own private purse, said I, were it not the strain that would be rather more than it could bear. If, on the other hand, I am to do so in the name of the firm, then in justice to my partners I must insist that, even in your case, a very businesslike precaution should be taken. I should much prefer to have it so, he said, raising up a square black morocco case which he had laid beside his chair. You have doubtless heard of the Beryl Coronet? One of the most precious possessions of the Empire, said I. Precisely. He opened the case, and there, embedded in soft, flesh-colored velvet, lay the magnificent piece of jewelry which he had named. There are 39 enormous barrels, he said, and the price of the gold casing is incalculable. The lowest estimate would be the worth of the coronet at double the sum which I have asked. I am prepared to leave it with you as my security. I took the precious case in my hands and looked at some perplexity from it and my illustrious client. You doubt its value, he asked. Not at all. I only doubt the propriety of leaving it. You may set your mind at rest about that. I should not dream of doing so were it not absolutely certain that I should be able to, in 4 days, reclaim it. It is a matter of form. Is it sufficiently secured? Ample. You understand, Mr. Holder, that I am giving you strong proof of the confidence which I have in you, founded upon all that I have heard of you. I rely upon you not only to be discreet and to refrain from all gossip upon the matter, but, above all, to preserve this coronet with every possible precaution, because I need not say that a great public scandal would be caused if any harm were to befall it. Any injury to it would almost be serious as its complete loss, for there are no barrels in the world that match these, and it would be impossible to replace them. I leave it with you, however, with every confidence, and I shall call for it in person on Monday morning. Seeing that the client was anxious to leave, I said no more, but calling for my cashier, I ordered him to pay over the 50 £100 note, £1,000 notes. When I was alone once more, however, with the precious case lying upon the table in front of me, I could not but think that some misgivings of the immense responsibility which it entailed upon me. There could be no doubt that, as it was a national possession, a horrible scandal would ensue if any misfortune should occur to it. I already regretted having ever consented to take charge of it. However, it was too late to alter the matter now, so I locked it up in my private safe and turned once more to my work. When evening came, I felt that it would be impudent to leave so precious a thing in the office behind me. Bankers' safes have been forced before now, and why should not mine be? If so, how terrible would the position in which I would find myself. I determined, therefore, that for the next few days I would always carry the case backwards and forward with me, so that it might never really be out of my reach. With this intention, I called a cab and drove out to my house in Statham, carrying the jewel with me. I did not breathe freely until I had taken it upstairs and locked it in my bureau of my dressing room. And now a word about my household, Mr. Holmes, for I wish you to thoroughly understand my situation. My groom and my page sleep out of the house, and may be set aside altogether. I have 3 maidservants who have been with me a number of years, and whose absolute reliability is above suspicion. Another, Lucy Parr, my second waiting maid, has only been in my service a few months. She came as an excellent character, however, and has always given me satisfaction. She is a very pretty girl and has attracted admirers on occasionally hunting round the place. That is the only drawback which we have found in her, but we believe her to be a thoroughly good girl in every way. So much for servants. My family itself is so small that it would not take me long to describe it. I am a widower, and I have only one son, Arthur. He has been a disappointment to me, Mr. Holmes. A grievous disappointment. I have no doubt that I have myself to blame. People tell me that I have spoiled him. Very likely I have. When my dear wife died, I felt that he was all that I had to love. I could not bear to see the smile fade even for a moment from his face. I have never denied him a wish. Perhaps it would have been better for both of us had I been sterner, but I meant it for the best. I was naturally given my intention that he should succeed me in my business, but he is not of a business turn. He was wild, wayward, and, to speak the truth, I could not trust him with the handling of large sums of money. When he was young, he became a member of an aristocratic club, and there, having charming manners, he was soon the intimate of a number of men whose long purses and expensive habits. He learned to play heavily at cards and to squander money on the turf, until he had again and again to come to me to implore me to give him an advance upon his allowance, that he might settle his debts of honor. He tried more than once to break away from the dangerous company which he was keeping, but each time the influence of his friend, Sir George Burwell, was enough to draw him back again. And I could not wonder that such a man as Sir George Burnwell should gain an influence over him, for he has frequently brought him to my house, and I have found myself that I could hardly resist the fascination of his manner. The older he is than he is of Arthur, a man of the world with his fingertips, one who has been everywhere, seen everything, a brilliant talker, and a man of great personal beauty. Yet, when I think of him in cold blood, far away from the glamour of his presence, I am convinced from his cynical speech and the look which I caught in his eyes that he is one who should be deeply disturbed. So I think, and so, too, thinks my little Mary, who has a woman's quick insight into character. And now there is only she to be described. She is my niece. But when my brother died 5 years ago and left her alone in the world, I adopted her, and have looked upon her ever since as my daughter. She is the sunbeam of my house, sweet, loving, beautiful, a wonderful manager and housekeeper, yet as tender and quiet and gentle as a woman could be. She is my right hand. I do not know what I could do without her. In only one matter has she ever gone against my wishes. Twice my boy has asked her to marry him, for he loves her devotedly, but each time she has refused him. I think that if anyone could have drawn him into the right path, it would have been she, and that his marriage would have changed his whole life. But now, alas, it is too late, forever too late. Now, Mr. Holmes, you know the people who live under my roof, and I shall continue with my miserable story. When we were taking coffee in the drawing-room that night after dinner, I told Arthur and Mary of my experience, and of the precious treasure which we had under our roof, suppressing only the name of the client. Lucy Parr, who had brought in the coffee, had, I am sure, left the room, but I cannot swear that the door was closed. Mary and Arthur were much interested and wished to see the famous coronet, but I thought it better not to disturb it. "Where have you put it?" asked Arthur. "In my own bureau." "Well, I hope to goodness the house won't be burgled during the night," he said. "It is locked up," I answered. "Oh, and any old key will fit that bureau. When I was a youngster I could have opened it myself with a key to the box-room cupboard." He often had a wild way of talking, so that I thought little of what he said. He followed me to my room, however, that night, with a very grave face. "Look here, Dad," he said, with his eyes cast down. "Can you let me have £200? "No, I cannot," I answered sharply. "I've been far too generous with you in money matters." "You have been very kind," said he, "but I must have the money, or else I can never show my face inside the club again." "And a very good thing, too," I cried. "Yes, but you would not have me leave a dishonored man," he said. "I cannot bear the disgrace. I must raise the money in some way, and if you will not let me have it, then I must try other means." I was very angry, for this was a third demand during this month. "You shall not have a farthing from me," I cried, on which he bowed and left the room without another word. When he was gone, I unlocked my bureau and made sure that my treasure was safe, and locked it again. Then I started to go round the house to see that all was secure, a duty which I usually leave to Mary, but which I thought it well to perform myself that night. As I came down the stairs, I saw Mary herself at the side window of the hall, which she closed and fastened as I approached. "Tell me, Dad," she said, looking a little disturbed, "did you give Lucy the maid leave to go out tonight?" "Certainly not." "She came in just now by the back door. I have no doubt that she has only been in the side gate to see someone, but I think it is hardly safe and we should be stopped." "You should speak to her in the morning, and if you prefer it. Are you sure that everything is fastened?" "Quite sure, Dad." "Then good night." I kissed her, and I went up to my bedroom again, and where I was soon asleep. "I am endeavoring to tell you everything, Mr. Holmes, which may have any bearing on the case, but I beg that you will question me upon any point which I did not make clear." "On the contrary, your statement is singularly lucid." I come to a part in my story now which I should have wished to be particularly so. I'm not a very heavy sleeper, and the anxiety in my mind tended, no doubt, to make me even less so than usual. About 2 in the morning, then, I was awakened by some sound in the house. I had ceased ere I was wide awake, but I had left an impression behind as to go to the window that had gently closed somewhere. I lay listening with all my ears. Suddenly, to my horror, there was a distinct sound of footsteps moving softly in the next room. I slipped out of bed, all palpitating with fear, and peeped around the corner of my dressing-room door. "Arthur!" I screamed. "You villain! You thief! How dare you touch that coronet?" The gas was half up, as I had left it, and my unhappy boy, dressed in only his shirt and trousers, was standing beside the light, holding the coronet in his hands. He appeared to be retching at it, bending it with all his strength. At my cry he dropped it out of his grasp and turned pale as death. I snatched it up and examined it. One of the gold corners, with the 3 of the barrels in it, was missing. "You blackguard!" I shouted, beside myself with rage. "You've destroyed it! You have dishonored me forever! Where are the jewels you've stolen?" Stolen, he cried. Yes, you thief, I roared, shaking him by the shoulder. There are none missing. There cannot be any missing, said he. There are 3 missing, and you know where they are. Must I call you a liar as well as a thief? Did I not see you trying to tear off another piece? You have called me names enough, said he. I will not stand for it longer. I shall not say another word about business since you have chosen to insult me. I will leave your house in the morning and make my own way in the world. You shall leave it in the hands of the police, I cried, half mad with grief and rage. I shall have this matter probed to the bottom. You shall learn nothing from me, said he, with a passion such as I should not have thought of his nature. If you choose to call the police, let the police find what they will. By this time the whole house was astir, for I had raised my voice in my anger. Mary was the first to rush into my room, and at the sight of the coronet and Arthur's face, she read the whole story, and with a scream fell down senseless to the ground. I sent the housemaid to the police and put the investigation in their hands at once. When the inspector and the constable entered the house, Arthur, who stood silently with his arms folded, asked me whether it was my intention to charge him with theft. I answered that it ceased to be a private matter, and that it had become a public one, since the ruined coronet was national property. I was determined that the law should have its way in everything. At least, he said, you will not have me arrested at once. It should be to your advantage as well as mine if I might leave the house for 5 minutes. That you may get away, or perhaps that you may conceal what you have stolen. Said I. And then, realizing the dreadful position in which I had been placed, I implored him to remember that not only my honor, but that of one who was far greater than I was at stake, and that he threatened to raise a scandal which would convulse the nation. He might avert it all if he were just but tell what he had done with the 3 missing stones. You may as well face the matter, said I. You have been caught in the act, and no confession could make your guilt less heinous. If you but make such reparation as is in your power by telling us where the Beryls are, all shall be forgiven and forgotten. Keep your forgiveness for those who ask for it, he answered, turning away from me with a sneer. I saw that he was too hardened for any words of mine to influence him. There was but one way for it. I called in the inspector and gave him into custody. The search was made at once, not only of his person, but of his room and every portion of the house where he could have possibly concealed the gems. But no trace of them could be found, nor would the wretched boy open his mouth for all our persuasions and our threats. This morning he was removed to a cell, and I, after going through all the police formalities, have hurried round to you to implore you to use your skill in unraveling the matter. The police have openly confessed that they can at present make nothing of it. You may go to any expense which you think necessary. I already offered a reward of £1,000. My God, what shall I do? I have lost my honor, my gems, and my son in one night. Oh, what shall I do? He put a hand on either side of his head and rocked himself to and fro, drowning to himself like a child whose grief was not beyond words. Sherlock Holmes sat for some few minutes with his brows knitted and his eyes fixed upon the fire. Do you receive much company? He asked. None save for my partner with his family, an occasional friend of Arthur's. Sir George Burnwell has been several times lately. No one else, I think. Do you go out much in society? Arthur does. Mary and I stay at home. We neither of us care for it. That is unusual for a young girl. She is quite mature. Besides, she is not so very young. She is 4 and 20. She is of a quiet nature. Besides, she is not so... This matter, from what you say, seems to have been a shock to her also. Terrible. She is even more affected than I. You have neither of you any doubt to your son's guilt. How can we have when I saw him with my own eyes with the coronet in his hands? I hardly consider that to be conclusive proof. Was the remainder of the coronet at all injured? Yes, it was twisted. Do you not think, then, that he might have been trying to straighten it? God bless you. You are doing what you can for him and me. But it is too heavy a task. What he was doing was there at all. If his purpose was innocence, why did he not say so? Precisely. And if he were guilty, why did he not invent a lie? His silence appears to be cut both ways. There are several singular points about this case. What did the police think of the noise which awoke you from your sleep? They consider that might be caused by Arthur's closing his bedroom door. A likely story. As if a man bent on felony would slam his door so that it would wake a household. What did they say, then, of the disappearance of these gems? They're still sounding the planking and probing of the furniture in hope of finding them. Have they thought of looking outside the house? Yes, they've shown extraordinary energy. The whole garden has already been minutely examined. Now, my dear sir, said Holmes, is it not obvious to you now that this matter really strikes very much deeper than you and the police were first inclined to think? It appeared to you that to be a simple case. To me, it seems exceedingly complex. Consider what is involved by your theory. You suppose that your son came down from his bed, went at great risk to your dressing room, opened your bureau, took out the cornet, broke off by main force a small portion of it, went off to some other place, concealed 3 gems out of the 39, with such skill that nobody can find them, and then returned with the other 36 in the room, to which he exposed himself to the greatest danger of being discovered? I ask you now, is such a theory tenable? What other is there? Cried the baker with a despair of gesture. If his motives were innocent, why didn't he not explain them? It is our task to find that out, replied Holmes. So now, if you please, Mr. Holder, we will set off for Streatham together, and devote an hour to glancing a little more closely into the details. My friend insisted upon my accompanying them in their expedition, which I was eager enough to do, for my curiosity and sympathy were deeply stirred by the story to which we had listened. I confess that the guilt of the banker's son appeared to me as obvious as it did to the unhappy father, but I still had such faith in Holmes's judgment that I felt that there must be some grounds for hope as long as he was dissatisfied with the whole accepted explanation. He hardly spoke a word the whole way to the southern suburb, but sat with his chin upon his breast and his hat drawn over his eyes, sunk in the deepest thought. Our client appeared to have taken fresh heart at the little glimpse of hope which had been presented to him, and he even broke into desultory chat with me over the business affairs. A short railway journey and a shorter walk brought us to Fairbank, the modest residence of the great financier. Fairbank was a good-sized square house of white stone, standing back a little way from the road. A double carriage sweep with snow-clad lawn stretched down in front of two large iron gates, which closed the entrance. On the right side was a small wooden thicket, which led into a narrow path between two neat hedges, stretching from the road to the kitchen door. And forming the tradesman's entrance. On the left ran a lane which led to the stables, and was not itself within the grounds at all, but being a public, little-used thoroughfare. Holmes left us standing at the door and walked slowly around the house, across the front, down the tradesman's path, and round to the garden behind the stable lane. So long was he that Mr. Holder and I went into the dining room and waited by the fire until he should return. We were sitting there in silence when the door opened and a young lady came in. She was rather above the middle height, slim, with dark hair and eyes, which seemed the darker against the absolute pallor of her skin. I do not think that I have ever seen such deadly paleness in a woman's face. Her lips, too, were bloodless, but her eyes were flushed with crying. As she swept silently into the room, she impressed me with a greater sense of grief than the banker had done in the morning. And it was the most striking in her that she was evidently the woman of strong character, with immense capacity for self-restraint. Disregarding my presence, she went straight to her uncle and passed her hand over his head with a sweet, womanly caress. "You have given orders that Asha should be liberated, have you not, Dad?" she asked. No, my girl. The matter must be probed to the bottom. But I'm sure that he is innocent. You know what women's instincts are. I know that he has done no harm, and that you will soon be very sorry you have acted so harshly. Why is he silent, then, if not innocent? Who knows? Perhaps because he is so angry that you should suspect him. How could I not help suspecting him when I actually saw him with the coronet in his hand? Oh, but he had only picked it up to look at it. Oh, do take my word for it that he is innocent. Let the matter drop and say no more. It is so dreadful to think of our dear Arthur in prison. I shall never let it drop until the gems are found. Never, Mary. Your affection for Arthur blinds you as to the awful consequences to me. Far from hushing the thing up, I have brought the gentleman down from London to inquire more deeply into it. This gentleman? She asked, facing round to me. No, his friend. He wished us to leave him alone. He is around in the stable lane now. The stable lane? She raised her dark eyebrows. What can he hope to find there? This, I suppose, is he. I trust, sir, that you will succeed in proving what I feel is sure the truth, that my cousin Arthur is innocent of this crime. I fully share your opinion, and I trust with you that we may prove it. Returned Holmes, going back to the mat to knock the snow off of his shoes. I believe I have the honor of addressing Miss Mary Holder. Might I ask you a question or two? Oh, pray do, sir, if I may help clear this horrible affair up. You heard nothing yourself during the night? Nothing until my uncle here began to speak loudly. I heard that, and I came down. You shut up the windows and doors the night before. Did you fasten all the windows? Yes. Were they all fastened this morning? Yes. You have a maid who has a sweetheart. I think that you remarked to your uncle last night that she had been out to see him. Yes, was the girl who was waiting in the drawing room, and who may have heard Uncle's remarks about the coronet. I see. You infer that she may have gone out to tell her sweetheart, and that the two may have planned the robbery? But, but what good is it in all these vague theories? Cried the banker impatiently, when I have told you that I saw Arthur with the coronet in his hands. Wait a little, Mr. Holder. We must come back to that. About this girl, Miss Holder. You saw her return to the kitchen door, I presume? Yes, when I went to see if the door was fastened for the night, I met her slipping in. I saw the man, too, in the gloom. Do you know him? Oh, yes, he's the greengrocer who brings round our vegetables. His name is Francis Prosper. He stood, said Holmes, to the left of the door, that is to say, farther up the path than is necessary to reach the door? Yes, he did. And he is a man with a wooden leg. Something like fear sprang up the young lady's expressive black eyes. Why, you are like a magician, she said. How do you know that? She smiled, but there was no answering smile with Holmes's thin, eager face. I should be very glad to go upstairs, he said. I shall probably wish to go over the outside of the house again. Perhaps I had better take a look at the lower windows before I go up. He walked swiftly around from one to the other, pausing only at the large one which looked into the hall from the stable lane. This he opened and made a very careful examination of the sill with his powerful magnifying lens. Now we shall go upstairs, he said at last. The banker's dressing room was a plainly furnished little chamber with a large grey carpet, a large bureau, and a long mirror. Holmes went to the bureau first and looked hard at the lock. Which key was used to open it? He asked. That which my son himself indicated, that with the cupboard of the lumber room. Have you it here? That is it on the dressing table. Sherlock Holmes took it up and opened the bureau. This is a noiseless lock, said he. It is no wonder that it did not wake you. This case, I presume, contains a coronet. We must have a look at it. He opened the case, and taking out the diadem, he laid it on the table. It was a magnificent specimen of the jeweler's art, and the 36 stones were the finest that I have ever seen. At one side of the coronet was a cracked edge, where a corner holder had 3 gems had been torn away. Now, Mr. Holder, said Holmes, here's the corner which corresponds to which has been so unfortunately lost. Might I beg that you will break it off? The banker recoiled in horror. I should not dream of trying, said he. Then I will. Holmes suddenly bent his strength upon it, but without result. I feel to give a little, he said, but though I am not exceptionally strong in the fingers, it would take me all my time to break it. An ordinary man could not do it. Now, what do you think would happen if I did break it, Mr. Holder? Would there be a noise like a pistol shot? Do you tell me that this all happened within a few yards of your bed, and that you heard nothing of it? I do not know what to think. It's all dark to me. But perhaps it may grow lighter as we go. What do you think, Miss Holder? It had nothing. I confess I share my uncle's perplexity. Your son had no shoes or slippers on when you saw him. He had nothing on save only his trousers and shirt. Thank you. We have certainly been favored with extraordinary luck during this inquiry, and it will be entirely our own fault if we do not succeed in clearing the matter up. With your permission, Mr. Holder, I shall continue my investigations outside. He went alone, at his own request, for he explained that any unnecessary footmarks might make his task more difficult. For an hour or more he was at work, returning at last with his feet heavy with snow and his features as inscrutable as ever. I think that I have seen now all that there is to see, Mr. Holder, said he. I can serve you best by returning to my rooms. But the gems, Mr. Holmes, where are they? I cannot tell. The banker wrung his hands. I shall never see them again, he cried. And my son, you give me hopes? My opinion is in no way altered. Then for God's sake, what is this dark business which has acted in my house last night? If you can call upon me at Baker Street Rooms tomorrow morning between 9 and 10, I shall be happy to do what I can to make it clear. I understand that you give me carte blanche to act for you, provided only that I get back the gems, that you may place no limit on the sum I may draw? I would give you my fortune to give them back. Very good. I shall look into the matter between this and then. Goodbye. It is just possible that I may have to come over here again before evening. It was obvious to me that my companion's mind was now made up about the case, although his conclusions were more than I could dimly imagine. Several times during our homeward journey I endeavored to sound him upon the point, but he always glided away from some other topic, until at last I gave it over to despair. It was not yet 3 when we found ourselves in our room once more. He hurried to his chamber and was down again in a few minutes dressed as a common loafer. With his collar turned up, his shiny, seedy coat, his red cravat, and his worn boots, he was a perfect sample of class. I think that I should do, he said, glancing into the glass above the fireplace. I only wish that you could come with me, Watson, but I fear that it won't do. I may be on the trail of some matter, and I may be following a will-o'-the-wisp, but I shall soon know which it is. I hope that I may be back in a few hours. He cut off a slice of beef from the joint upon the sideboard, sandwiching it between 2 rounds of bread, and thrusting this rude meal in his pocket, he started off on his expedition. I had just finished my tea when he returned, evidently in excellent spirits, swinging an old elastic-sided boot in his hand. He chucked down in the corner and helped himself to a cup of tea. I only looked in as I passed, said he. I'm going right on it. Where to? Oh, to the other side of the West End. It may be some time before I get back. Don't wait up for me in case that I should be late. Oh, how are you getting on? Oh, so-so. Nothing to complain of. I've been out in Steetham since I saw you last. But I did not call on the house. It is a very sweet little problem, and I would not have missed it for a good deal. However, I must not sit gossiping here, but must get to these disreputable clothes off and return to my highly respectable self. I could see by his manner that he had stronger reasons for satisfaction than his words alone would imply. His eyes twinkled, and there was even a touch of color upon his shallow cheeks. He hastened upstairs, and a few moments later we heard him slam the hall door, which told me that he was off once more on his congenial bunt. I waited until midnight, but there was no sign of his return, so I retired to my room. It was no uncommon thing for him to be away for days and nights on end, when he was hot upon the scent, so that his lateness caused me no surprise. I do not know what hour he came in, but when I came down to breakfast in the morning, here he was with a cup of coffee in one hand and the paper in the other, as fresh and as trim as possible. "You'll excuse me for beginning without you, Watson," he said, "but you remember that our client was rather audibly early appointment this morning." "Why, it is after 9 now," I answered. "I should not be surprised that he were. I thought that I heard a ring." It was indeed our friend the financier. I was shocked by the change which had come over him, for his face, which was naturally as broad and massive, would now be pinched and fallen in, while his hair seemed to be at least a shade whiter. He entered with a weariness and lethargy which was even more painful than his violence of the morning before, and he dropped heavily onto the armchair which I pushed forward for him. "I do not know what I have done to be so severely tried," he said. "Only 2 days ago I was a happy and prosperous man without a care in the world, and now I am left to a lonely, dishonoured age. One sorrow comes upon the heels of the other. My niece, Mary, has deserted me." "Deserted you?" "Yes. Her bed this morning has not been slept in. Her room was empty, and a note lay for me upon the full table. I had said to her last night, in sorrow, not in anger, that if she married my boy, all might have been well with him. Perhaps it was thoughtless of me to say so. It is to that remark in which she refers in this note." Okay. Thank you. "My dearest uncle, I have brought trouble upon you, and that if I have acted differently, this terrible misfortune might never have occurred. I cannot, with this thought in mind, ever again be happy under your roof, and I feel that I must leave you forever. Do not worry about my fortune, for that is provided for, and, above all, do not search for me, for it will be fruitless labour and an ill service to me. In life or in death, I am ever your loving Mary." "What could she mean by this note, Mr. Holmes? Do you think that it points to suicide?" "No, nothing of the kind. It is perhaps her best possible solution. I trust, Mr. Holder, that you are nearing the end of your troubles." "So say you have heard something, Sir Holmes. Have you learned something? Where are the gems?" "You would not think that £1,000 apiece is an excessive sum for them." "I would pay 10. "That would be unnecessary. 3,000 will cover the matter, and there is a little reward, I fancy. Have you your cheque-book? Here's a pen. Better make it out for £4,000. "I would pay 10. "That would not be necessary. £3,000 will cover the matter. And there's... With a dead face, the banker made out the required cheque. Holmes walked over to his desk, took out a little triangular piece of gold with 3 gems in it, and threw it down upon the table. With a shriek of joy, our client clutched it up. "You have it," he gasped. "I'm saved! I'm saved!" The reaction of joy was as passionate as his grief had been, and he hugged the recovered gems to his bosom. "There is one other thing you owe, Mr. Holder," said Sherlock Holmes rather sternly. "Oh," he caught up a pen. "Name the sum, and I will pay it." "No, the debt is not to me. You owe a very humble apology to that noble lad, your son, who has carried himself in this matter as I should be proud to see my own son do, should I ever have the chance to have one." Then it was Arthur who took them. I told you yesterday, and I will repeat today, it was not. Are you sure of it? Then let us hurry to him at once and let him know that the truth is known. He knows it already. When I have cleared it all up, I had an interview with him, and finding that he would not tell the story, I told it to him, on which he had to confess that I was right, and to add a little few details, which were not yet quite clear to me. The news of this morning, however, may fast open his lips. For heaven's sake, tell me then, what is this extraordinary mystery? I will do so, and I will show you the steps by which I reached it. Let me say to you, first, that which it is hardest for me to say, and for you to hear. There has been an understanding between Sir George Burnwell and your niece Mary. They have now fled together. My Mary? Impossible! It is unfortunate more than possible. It is certain. Neither you nor your son knew the true character of this man when you admitted him into your family circle. He is one of the most dangerous men in England, a ruined gambler, an absolutely desperate villain, a man without heart or conscience. Your niece knew nothing of such men. When he breathed his vows to her, as he had done to 100 before, she flattered herself that she alone had touched his heart. The devil knew what was said, but at least she became his tool, and in the habit of seeing him nearly every evening. I cannot and I will not believe it, cried the banker with his ashen face. I will tell you, then, what occurred in your house last night. Your niece, when you had, as she thought, gone to your room, slipped down and talked to her lover through the window which led to her stable line. His footmarks were pressed right through the snow, so long as he had stood there. She told him of the coronet. His wicked lust for gold kindled the news, and he bent her to his will. I have no doubt that she loved you, but there are women in whom the love of a lover extinguishes all other loves, and I think that she must have been one. She had hardly listened to his instructions when she saw you coming downstairs, on which she closed the window rapidly and told you that one of the servants escapade with his wooden-legged lover, which is all perfectly true. Your boy, Arthur, went to bed after this interview with you, but he slept badly on account of his uneasiness about his club debts. In the middle of the night he heard a soft tread past his door, so he rose, and looking out, was surprised to see his cousin walking very stealthily along the passage until she disappeared into her dressing-room. Petrified with astonishment, the lad slipped on some clothes and waited there in the dark to see what would come of the strange affair. Presently she emerged from the room again, and in the light of the passage lamp saw your son that she carried on the precious coronet in her hands. She passed down the stairs, and he, thrilling with horror, ran along and slipped behind the curtain near your door, whence he could see what passed in the hall beneath. He saw her stealthily open the window, hand out the coronet to someone in the gloom, and then closing it once more hurry back to her room, passing quite close to where he stood behind the curtain. As long as she was in the scene, he could not take any action without horrible exposure to the woman whom he loved. But the instant that she was gone, he realized how crushing a misfortune that would be for you, and how all important it was to set it right. He rushed down, just as he was, in his bare feet, opened the window, sprang out into the snow, and ran down the lane, where he could see the dark figure in the moonlight. Sir George Burnwell tried to get away, but Arthur caught him, and there was a struggle between them, your lad tugging at one side of the cornet, and his opponent at the other. During the scuffle, your son struck Sir George, and cut him over the eye. Then something happened, suddenly snapped, and your son, finding that he had the coronet in his hands, rushed back, closed the window, and ascended to your room, and had just observed the coronet had been twisted in the struggle, and was endeavoring to straighten it, when you appeared upon the scene. Is it possible? Gasped the maker. Then you roused his anger by calling him names at the moment when he felt that he had deserved your warmest thanks. He could not explain the true state of affairs without betraying one who certainly deserved little enough consideration at his hands. He took the more chivalrous route, however, and preserved her secret. And that was why she shrieked and fainted when she saw the coronets, cried Mr. Holder. Oh my God, what a blind fool I've been! And asking him to be allowed to go for 5 minutes. The dear fellow wanted to see if the missing piece was in the scene of the struggle. How cruelly I've misjudged him! When I arrived at your house, continued Holmes, I at once went very carefully around it to observe if there were any traces in the snow which might help me. I knew that none had fallen since the evening before, and also that there had been a strong frost to preserve impressions. I passed along the tradesman route, but found it all trampled down and indistinguishable. Just beyond it, however, at the far side of the kitchen door, a woman had stood and talked with a man, whose round impression on one side showed that he had a wooden leg. I could even tell that they had been disturbed, for the woman had run back swiftly to the door, and was shown in deep toe and high heel marks, while the wooden leg had waited a little and had then gone away. I thought at the time that this might be the maid and her sweetheart, of whom you had already spoken to me, and inquiry showed it was so. I passed round the garden without seeing anything more than random tracks, which I took to be the police. But when I went to the stable lane, a very long, complex story was written in the snow. There was a double line of tracks of a booted man, and a second double line which I saw, which, with delight, belonged to a man with naked feet. I was at once convinced, from what your son had told me, the latter was your son. The first had walked both ways, but the other had run swiftly, and as his tread was marked in places of depressions of his boot, it was obvious that he had passed after the other. I followed them up, and found they led to a hall window where the boots had worn all the snow away while waiting. And then I walked to the other end, which 100 yards or more down the lane, where I saw the boots had faced round where the snow was, cut up as though there had been a struggle, and finally there were a few drops of blood had fallen, to show me that I was not mistaken. The boots had run off down the lane, and another little smudge of blood showed that it was he who had been hurt. When he came to the high road at the other end, I found that the pavement had been cleared, and that was the end of that clue. On entering the house, however, I had examined, as you remember, the sill and the framework of the hall window with my lens, and I could not see at once that someone had passed out, but I could distinguish the outline of an instep where the wet foot had been placed on coming in. I was at the beginning to be able to form an opinion of what had occurred. A man had waited outside the window, someone had brought the gems, the deed had been overseen with your son, he had pursued the thief, had struggled with him, they each had tugged the coronet, their united strength caused injuries which neither alone could have effected. He had returned the prize, but had left the fragment in the grasp of his opponent. So far I was clear. The question was now, who was the man who had brought it to him, the coronet? It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Now, I knew that it was not you who had brought it down, so there only remained your niece and the maids. But if it were the maids, why should your son allow him to be accused in their place? There could be no possible reason, as he loved his cousin. However, there was an excellent explanation why he should retain her secret, the more so that his secret was a disgraceful one. When I remembered that you had seen her at the window, and how she had fainted at seeing the coronet again, my conjecture became a certainty. And who could it be that was her confederate? A lover, evidently, for who else could outweigh the love of the gratitude she must feel to you? I knew that you went a little out, and that your circle of friends was a very limited one. But among them was Sir George Burnwell. I had heard of him before as being a man of evil reputation among women. It must have been he who tore those boots and retained the missing gems. Even though he knew that Arthur had discovered him, he might still flatter himself that he was safe, for the lad would not say a word without compromising his own family. Well, your own good sense will suggest the measures I took. I went in the shape of a loafer to Sir George's house, managed to pick up an acquaintance of his valet. I learned that his master had cut his head the night before, and finally, at the expense of 6 shillings, made all sure by buying a pair of his off-cast boots. With these, I journeyed down to Streatham and saw that they exactly fitted the tracks. I saw an ill-dressed vagabond in the lane the other day, said Mr. Holder. Precisely, it was I. I found that I had my man, so that I came home and changed my clothes to so delicate part which I had to play then, for I saw the prosecution was to be avoided to that scandal, and I knew that so astute a villain would see that our hands were tied in the matter. I went and saw him. At first, of course, he denied everything, but then I gave him every particular that had occurred. He tried to bluster and took down a life-preserver from the wall. I knew my man, however, and I clapped my pistol to his head before he could strike. Then he became a little more reasonable. I told him that we would give him a price for the stones he held, £1,000 apiece. That brought out the first signs of grief that he had shown. "Why, dash it all," he said, "I've let them go at 600 for 3. I soon managed to get the address from the receiver who had them, on promising him that there would be no prosecution. Off I set to him, and after chaffering, I got our stones at £1,000 apiece. Then I looked upon your son, told him all that was right, and eventually got to my bed about 2 o'clock after what I call a really hard day's work. A day which has saved England from great public scandal," said the banker, rising. "Sir, I cannot find the words to thank you, but you shall find me not ungrateful for what you have done. Your skill has indeed exceeded all that I have heard of. And now I must fly, my dear boy, to apologize to him for all the wrong which I have done. And to what you tell me of poor Mary, it goes to my very heart. Not even your skill can inform me where she is now." "I think that we may safely say," returned Holmes, "that she is wherever Sir George Burnwell is. It is equally certain, too, that wherever her sins are, they will receive a more sufficient punishment." Oh, another stretch. Oh. Whew. Oh. I'm trying to think of what kind of gemstone a beryl is. It's Beryl. It sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it. I'm going to have to look it up because I'm curious now. Oh, okay. Emeralds. Well, it's same crystal family as emeralds and aquamarine. Okay. Well, so, yeah, I can say an emerald coronet. Let's see, how long is this next one? Oh, is 29 pages. But it is the last one in the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So next week we'll start with the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Nice. So, this story The Adventure of the Copper Beeches. To the man who loves art for his own sake, remarked Sherlock Holmes, tossing aside the advertisement sheet of the Daily Telegraph, it is frequently in its least important and lowliest manifestations that the keenest pleasure can be derived. It is pleasant to be the observed, Watson, that you have far grasped the truth in this little records of our cases, which you have been good enough to draw up, and I am bound to say, occasionally to embellish. You have given prominence not so much to the causes célèbres and sensational trials in which I have figured, but rather to those incidents which may have been trivial in themselves, but which have given room to those faculties of deduction and of logical synthesis which I have made my special providence. And yet, said I, smiling, I cannot quite hold myself absolved of the charge of sensationalism which has been urged against my records. You have erred, perhaps, he observed, taking up a glowing cinder with tongs and lighting with it the leaden cherry-wood pipe, which was wont to replace his clay when it was in disputations rather than meditative mood. You have erred, perhaps, in attempting to put color and life into each of our statements, instead of confining yourself to the task of placing upon record that severe reasoning from cause to effect, which is really the only notable feature of the thing. It seems to me that I have done you full injustice in the matter. I remarked with some coldness, for I was repelled by the egotism which I had more than once observed by the strong factor in my friend's singular character. No, it is not selfishness or conceit, he answered, answering, as his wont, my thoughts rather than my words. If I claim full justice for my art, it is because it is an impersonal thing, a thing beyond myself. Crime is common, logic is rare. Therefore, it is upon the logic rather than upon the crime you should dwell. You have degraded what should have been the course of lectures into a series of tales. It was a cold morning in the early spring, and we sat after breakfast on either side of the cheery fire in the old room of Baker Street. A thick fog rolled down between the lines of the dun-colored houses, and opposing windows loomed dark, shapeless blurs through the heavy yellow grease. Our gas was lit and shone the white cloth and glimmer of china and metal, for the table had not been cleared yet. Sherlock Holmes had been silent all the morning, dipping occasionally into the advertisement columns for successions of papers until last. Having apparently given up his search, he had emerged in no very sweet temper to lecture me upon my literary shortcomings. At the same time, he remarked after a pause, during which he had sat puffing his long pipe and gazing down into the fire, You can hardly be open to a charge of sensationalism, for out of these cases you have been so kind to interest yourself in, a fair proportion did not treat the crime in its legal sense at all. A small matter in which I endeavoured to help the King of Bohemia, the singular experience of Miss Mary Sutherland, the problem connected to the man with a twisted lip, and the incidents of the noble bachelor, which were all matters which are outside the pale of the law. But in avoiding the sensational, I fear that you may have borrowed on the trivial. It may have been so, I answered, but the methods I have told have been novel and of interest. Pshaw, my dear fellow! What do the public, the great unobservant public, who could hardly tell a weaver by his tooth or a composter by his left thumb, care about the finer shades of analysis and deduction? But indeed, if you are trivial, I cannot blame you, for the days of the great cases are past. Man, or at least criminal man, has lost all enterprise and originality. As to my own little practice, it seems to be degenerating into an agency for recovering lost lead pencils or giving advice to young ladies from boarding schools. I think that I have touched the bottom at last, however. This note I had this morning reaches my 0 point. Fancy, read it. He tossed the crumpled letter across to me. It was dated from Montague Place the preceding evening, and ran thus. Dear Mr. Holmes, I am anxious to consult you on whether or not I should accept a situation which has been offered me by a governess. I shall call at 10:30 tomorrow. If I do not inconvenience you, yours faithfully, Violet Hunter. Do you know the young lady? I asked. Not I. It is 10:30 now. Yes, and I have no doubt that this is her ring. It may turn out to be more interesting than you think. Remember that the affair of the blue carbuncle, which appeared to be just a whim at first, developed into a serious investigation. It may be so in this case as well. Well, let us hope so. But our doubts will very soon be discovered, for here, unless I am much mistaken, is the person in question. As he spoke, the door opened, and a young lady entered the room. She was plainly but neatly dressed, with a bright, quick face, freckled like a plover's egg, and with the brisk manner of a woman who was on her way to make her place in the world. "You'll excuse me for my troubling you, I'm sure," said she, as my companion rose to greet her. "But I've had a very strange experience, and as I have no parents or relations of any sort for whom I could ask advice, I thought that perhaps you would be kind enough to tell me what I should do." "Pray take a seat, Miss Hunter. I shall be happy to do anything that I can serve you." I could see that Holmes was favourably impressed by her manner and speech of this new client. He looked her over in his searching fashion, and then composed himself with his lids drooping and his fingertips together to listen to her story. "I have been a governess for 5 years," said she, "in the family of Colonel Spence Monroe, but 2 months ago the Colonel received an appointment to Halifax, in Nova Scotia, and took his children over to America with him, so that I found myself without a situation. I advertised, and I answered advertisements, but without success. At last the little money which I had saved began to run short, and I was at my wit's end as what to do. There's a well-known agency for governesses in the West End called Westaways, and there I used to call about once a week in order to see whether anything had turned up which might suit me. Westaway was the name of the founder of the business, but it was really managed by Miss Stopper. She sits in her own little office, and the ladies who are seeking employment wait in the anteroom, and are then shown in one by one, when she consults their ledgers, and sees whether she has anything which can suit them. Well, when I called last week, I was shown into the little office as usual, but I found that Miss Stopper was not alone. A prodigiously stout man with a very smiling face and a great heavy chin which rolled down fold upon fold over sewed satin at her elbow, with a pair of glasses on his nose, looking very earnestly at the ladies who entered. As I came in, he gave a little jump in his chair and quickly turned to Miss Stopper. "That will do," said he. "I could not ask for anything better. Capital! Capital!" He seemed quite enthusiastic and rubbed his hands together in the most genial fashion. He was such a comfortable-looking man that it was quite a pleasure to look at him. "You're looking for a situation, miss?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "As governess?" "Yes, sir." "And what salary do you ask?" "I asked for £4 a month in my last place with Colonel Spence Monroe." "Oh, tut, tut! Sweating! Rank sweating!" he cried, throwing his fat hands out into the air like a man who is in a boiling passion. "How can anyone offer so pitiful a sum to a lady with such attractions and accomplishments?" "My accomplishments, sir, may be less than you imagine," he said. "A little French, a little German, music, and drawing." "Tut, tut!" he cried. "This is all quite beside the question. The point is, have you or have you not the bearing and deportment of a lady? There it is in a nutshell. If you have not, you are not fitted for the rearing of a child who may some day play with a considerable part in the history of the country. But if you have, why, then how can any gentleman ask you to be condescended to accept anything less than 3 figures? Your salary with me, madam, would commence at £100 a year." "You may imagine, Mr. Holmes, that to me, destitute as I was, such an offer seemed almost too good to be true. The gentleman, however, foreseeing perhaps the look of incredulity on my face, opened a pocket-book and took out a note. "It is also my custom," said he, smiling in the most pleasant fashion until his eyes were just 2 little shining slits among the white creases of his face, "to advance my young ladies half their salary beforehand, so that they may meet my little expenses of the journey and their wardrobe." It seemed to me that I have never met so fascinating or so thoughtful a man. I was already in debt to my tradesmen. The advance was a great convenience, and yet there was something unnatural about the whole transaction which made me wish to know a little more before I quite committed myself. "May I ask where you live, sir?" said I. "Hampshire. Charming rural place. The Copper Beeches, 5 miles on the far side of Winchester. It is a most lovely country, my dear young lady, and the dearest old country house." "And my duties, sir, I should be glad to know what they would be." "One child, one dear little romper just 6 years old. Oh, if you could see him kicking cockroaches in slipper, smack, smack, smack. 3 gone before you could wink." He leaned back in his chair and laughed, his eyes again turning into his head. I was a little startled at the nature of the child's amusement, but the father's laughter made me think that perhaps he was joking. "My sole duties, then," I asked, "are there to take charge of the simple child?" "No, no, not the soul, not the soul, my dear young lady," he cried. "Your duty would be, as I am sure your good sense would suggest, to obey any little commands my wife might have, provided always that they are such commands as a lady might with propriety obey. You see no difficulty, eh?" "I should be happy to make myself useful." "Quite so. In dress now, for example. We are fatty people, you know, fatty but kind-hearted. If you were asked to wear any dress which might we might give you, you would not object to our little whim, eh? Always sounded suspicious.
No, said I, considerably astonished at his words.
Or sit here, or sit there. That would not be offensive to you.
Oh, no.
Or to cut your hair quite short before you come to us.
I could hardly believe my ears, as you may observe, Mr. Holmes. My hair is somewhat luxuriant, and of a rather peculiar tint of chestnut. It has been considered artistic. I could not dream of sacrificing it in this offhand fashion. I'm afraid that this might be quite impossible, said I. He had been watching me eagerly out of his small eyes, and I could see how a shadow pass over his face as I spoke.
I'm afraid that it would be quite essential,
Said he.
It is a little fancy of my wife's, and ladies' fancies, you know. Madam, ladies' fancies must be consulted. And so you won't cut your hair?
No, sir, I really could not, I answered firmly.
Oh, well, then that quite settles the matter. It is a pity, because in other respects you really would have done quite nicely, Miss. In that case, Miss Stopper, I'd best inspect a few more of your young ladies.
The manageress had sat all this while busy with her papers without a word to either of us, but she glanced at me now and with so much annoyance upon her face that I could not help suspecting that she had lost a handsome commission through my refusal. Do you desire your name to be kept upon the books? She asked. If you please, Miss Stopper. Well, really, it seems rather useless since you refuse the most excellent offers in this fashion, she said sharply. You can hardly expect us to exert ourselves to find another opening for you. Good day to you, Miss Hunter. She struck a gong upon the table, and I was shown out by the page. Well, Mr. Holmes, when I got back to my lodgings, I found little enough in the cupboard, and 1 or 2 or 3 bills lay upon the table. I began to ask myself whether I had not done a very foolish thing. After all, if these people had strange fads and expected obedience on the most extraordinary matters, they're at least ready to pay for their eccentricity. Very few governesses in England are getting £100 a year. Besides, what use was my hair to me? Many people are improved by wearing it short, and perhaps I should be among the number. Next day I was inclined to think that I had made a mistake, but by the day after I was sure of it. I'd almost overcome my pride so far as to go back to the agency and inquire whether the place was still open when I received the letter from the gentleman himself. I have it here, and I will read it to you. The Copper Beeches, near Winchester. Dear Miss Hunter, Miss Stopper has been very kindly given me your address, and I write from here to ask you whether you have reconsidered your decision. My wife is very anxious that you should come, for she has been much attracted by the description of you. We are willing to give you £30 a quarter, or 120 a year, as to recompense for any little inconvenience our fads may cause you. They are not very exciting, after all. My wife is fond of a particular shade of electric blue, and would like you to wear such dress indoors in the morning. You need not, however, go to the expense of purchasing one, as we have one belonging to our dear daughter Alice, now in Philadelphia, which would, I think, fit you very well. Then, as to sitting here or there and amusing yourself in any manner indicated, that need be no inconvenience. As in regards to your hair, it is no doubt a pity, especially as I could not help remarking the beauty during our short interview. But I am afraid that it must remain firm at this point, and I only hope that the increased salary may recompense you for your loss. Your duties, as far as the child is concerned, are very light. Now, do try to come, and I shall bring with you a little dog cart to Winchester. Let me know your train. Yours faithfully, Geoffrey Rucastle. That is a letter which I received, Mr. Holmes, and my mind is made up that I will accept it. I thought, however, that before taking a final step, I should like to submit the whole matter to you for your consideration.
Well, Miss Hunter, if your mind is made up, that settles the question, said Holmes, smiling.
But you would not advise me to refuse.
I confess it is not a situation which I thought I would see a sister of mine apply for.
What is the meaning of it all, Mr. Holmes?
Ah, I have no data. I cannot tell you. Perhaps you have yourself formed some opinion?
Well, there seems to me to be only one possible solution. Mr. Rucastle seemed to be a very kind, good-natured man. It is not possible that his wife is a lunatic, that he desires to keep the matter quiet for fear that she would take into an asylum, and that he humors her fancies in every way in order to prevent an outbreak.
That is a possible solution. In fact, as matters stand, it is the most probable one. But, in any case, it does not seem to be a nice household for a young lady.
But the money, Mr. Holmes, the money!
Ah, yes. Of course the pay is good. Too good. That is what makes me uneasy. Why should they give you £120 a year when they could have had their pick at £40? There must be some strong reason behind it.
I thought that if I told you the circumstances you would understand afterwards if I wanted your help. I should feel so much stronger if I felt that you were at the back of me.
Oh, you may carry that feeling away with you. I assure you that your little problem promises to be the most interesting which has come in my way for some months. There is something distinctly novel about some of the features. If you should find yourself in doubt or in danger...
Danger? What danger do you foresee?
Holmes shook his head gravely. It would cease to be a danger if we could define it, said he. But at any time, night or day, telegram would bring me down to your help.
That is enough.
She rose briskly from her chair with the anxiety all swept around her from her face.
I shall get on to Hampshire quite easy in my mind now. I shall write to Mr. Rucastle at once, sacrifice my poor hair tonight, and start for Winchester tomorrow.
With a few grateful words to Holmes, she bade us both good night and bustled off on her way. At least, said I, as we heard quick, firm steps down the stairs, she seems to be a young lady who is very able to take care of herself. And she would need to be, said Holmes gravely. I am much mistaken if we do not hear from her before many days are past. It was not very long before my friend's prediction was fulfilled. A fortnight went by, during which I frequently found my thoughts turning in her direction, and wondering what strange side alley of human experience this lonely woman had strayed into. The unusual salary, the curious conditions, the light duties all pointed to something abnormal, though whether a fad or a plot, or whether the man was a philanthropist or a villain, it was quite beyond my powers to determine. As to Holmes, I observed that he sat frequently for an hour and a half on end, with knitted brows and an abstracted air, but he swept the matter away with a wave of his hand when I mentioned it. Data, data, data! He cried impatiently. I can't make bricks without clay. And yet he would always wind up muttering with no sister of his should have ever accepted such a situation. The telegram which we eventually received came late one night, just as I was thinking of turning in, and Holmes was sitting down to one of those all-night chemical researches which he frequently indulged in, when I would leave him stooping over a retort and a test tube at night and find him in the same position when I came down the next morning for breakfast. He opened a yellow envelope, glanced at the message, and threw it across to me. I'll look up the trains to Bradshaw, said he, and turned his back to his chemical studies. The summons was a brief and urgent one.
Please be at the Black Swan Hotel at Winchester at midnight tomorrow, it said. Do come. I'm at my wit's end, Hunter.
Will you come with me? Asked Holmes, glancing up. I should wish to. Just look it up, then. There is a train at past, said I, glancing over at Bradshaw. It is due at Winchester at 11:30. That will do nicely. Then perhaps I had better propose my analysis of the acetones, as we may need to be at our best in the morning. By 11 o'clock the next day, we were well upon our way to the old English capital. Holmes had been buried in the morning papers all the way down, but after we had passed the Hampshire border, he threw them down and began to admire the scenery. It was an ideal spring day, a light blue sky flecked with little fleecy white clouds drifting across from west to east. The sun was shining very brightly, and yet there was an exhilarating nip in the air, which set at edge a man's energy. All over the countryside, away to the rolling hills of Aldershot, the little red and grey roofs of the farmsteads peeped out among the light green of the new foliage. Are they not fresh and beautiful? I cried with the enthusiasm of a man fresh from the fogs of Baker Street. But Holmes shook his head gravely. Do you know, Watson, he said, that it is one of the curses of the mind with a turn like mine, that I must look at everything with reference to my own special subject. You look at these scattered houses, and you are impressed at their beauty. I look at them, and the only thought which comes to me is feeling of their isolation, of the impunity with which crimes may be committed there. Good heavens, I cried. Who can associate crime with these dear old homesteads? They always fill me with a certain horror. It is my belief, Watson, founded upon my experience, that the lowliest and vilest alleys in London do not present a more dreadful record of sin than does the smiling and beautiful countryside. You horrify me. But the reason is very obvious. Pressure of public opinion can do in a town what the law cannot accomplish. There is no lane so vile that the scream of a tortured child or the thud of a drunkard's blow does not beget sympathy and indignation among the neighbors, and then the whole machinery of justice is ever so close that the word of complaint can set it going, and there is but a step between the crime and the dock. But look at these lonely houses, each in its own fields, filled for the most part with poor ignorant folk who know little of the law. Think of the deeds of hellish cruelty, the hidden wickedness which may go on, year in, year out, in such places, and none the wiser. Had this lady who appeals to us gone to help from live in Winchester, I should never have had a fear for her. It is 5 miles of country which makes the danger. Still, it is clear that she is not personally threatened. No, if she can come to Winchester to meet us, she can get away. Quite so. She has her freedom. What can be the matter, then? Can you suggest no explanation? I have devised 7 separate explanations. Each of them would cover the facts as far as we know them. But which of these is correct can only be determined by the fresh information which we shall, no doubt, soon find waiting for us. Well, there is the tower of the cathedral, and we shall soon learn all that Miss Hunter has to tell. The Black Swan was an inn of repute in High Street, at no distance from the station, and there we found the young lady waiting for us. She had engaged a sitting room, and our lunch waited us upon the table.
I'm so very delighted that you have come, she said earnestly. It is so very kind of you both. Indeed, I do not know what I should do. Your advice is altogether invaluable to me.
Pray tell us what has happened to you.
I will do so, and I must be quick, for I have promised Mr. Rucastle to be back before 3. I got his leave to come into town this morning, though he little knew what for purpose.
Let us have everything in its due order. Holmes thrust his long legs out towards the fire and composed himself to listen.
In the first place, I may say that I have met, on the whole, no actual ill treatment from Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle. It is only fair to them to say that, but I cannot understand them, and am not easy in my mind about them.
What can you not understand?
The reasons for their conduct, but you shall have it all as it has occurred. When I came down, Mr. Rucastle met me here and drove me in his dog-cart to the Copper Beeches. It is, as he said, beautifully situated, but it is not beautiful in itself, for it is a large square block of house, whitewashed, but all stained and streaked with damp and bad weather. There are grounds around it, woods on all three sides, but on the fourth a field which slopes down to the Hampton High Road, which curves about 100 yards from the front door. This ground in front belongs to the house, but the woods all around are part of Lord Southerton's preserves. A clump of copper beeches immediately in front of the hall door has given the place its name. I was driven over by an employer, who was amiable as ever, and was introduced to him by him to the evening to the wife and child. There was no truth, Mr. Holmes, in the conjecture which seemed to be as probable in your rooms as Baker Street. Mr. Rucastle was not mad. I found her to be a silent, pale-faced woman, which, younger than her husband, not more than 30, I should think, while he can hardly be less than 45. From their conversation, I gather that they have been married for 7 years, and that he was a widower, and that his only child by his first wife was a daughter who has gone to Philadelphia. Mr. Rucastle told me in private that the reason why she left them was that she was an unreasoning aversion to her stepmother. As the daughter could not have been less than 20, I can imagine that her position must have been unfavorable with her father's young wife. Mrs. Rucastle seemed to me to be colourless in mind as well as in feature. She impressed me neither favourably nor the reverse. She was a nonentity. It was easy to see that she was passionately devoted to both her husband and her little son. Her light grey eyes wandered continually from one to the other, noting every little want and forestalling if possible. He was kind to her also in his bluff, boisterous fashion, and on the whole they seemed to be a happy couple. And yet she had some secret sorrow, this woman. She would often be lost in deep thought, with the saddest look upon her face. More than once I have surprised her in her tears. I have thought sometimes that it was the disposition of the child which weighed upon her mind, for I have never met so utterly spoiled and so ill-mannered of a little creature. He is small for his age, with a head which is quite disproportionately large. His whole life appears to be spent in an altercation between savage fits of passion and gloomy intervals of sulking. Giving pain to any creature weaker than himself seems to be his one idea of amusement, and he shows quite remarkable talent in planning the capture of mice, little birds, and insects. But I would rather not talk about that creature, Mr. Holmes, and indeed he has little to do with my story.
I am glad for all details, my friend, whether they seem to you to be relevant or not.
I shall try not to miss anything of importance. The most unpleasant thing about the house, which struck me at once, was the appearance and conduct of the servants. There are only two, a man and his wife. Toller, for that is his name, is a rough, uncouth man with grizzled hair and whiskers, and a perpetual smell of drink. Twice since I have been with him he's been quite drunk, and yet Mr. Rucastle seemed to take no notice of it. His wife is a very tall and strong woman, with a sour face, as silent as Mrs. Rucastle, but much more amiable. They are a most unpleasant couple, but unfortunately I spend most of my time in the nursery and my own room, which are next to each other in one corner of the building. For 2 days after my arrival at the Copper Beeches, my life was very quiet. On the third, Mrs. Rucastle came down just before breakfast and whispered something to her husband. "Oh, yes," he said, turning to me. "We are very much obliged to you, Miss Hunter, for falling in with our whims so far as to cut your hair. I assure you that it has not distracted in the tiniest iota from your appearance. We shall now see how the electric blue dress will become you. You will find it laid upon your bed in your room, and if you would be so good as to put it on, we should both be extremely obliged." The dress which I found waiting for me was in that peculiar shade of blue. It was an excellent material, a sort of beige, but it bore unmistakable signs of having been worn before. It could not have been a better fit if I had measured for it, but both Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle expressed delight at the look of it, which seemed exaggerated in its vehemence. They were waiting for me in the drawing room, which was a very large room, stretching along the entire front of the house, with 3 long windows reaching down to the floor. A chair had been placed in the central window with its back turned towards it. In this I was asked to sit, and then Mr. Rucastle walked up and down on the other side of the room, began to tell me a series of the funniest stories that I have ever listened to. I cannot imagine how comical he was, and I laughed until I was quite weary. Mrs. Rucastle, however, who was evidently no sense of humour, never so much as smiled, but sat with her hands in her lap, and a sad, anxious look upon her face. After an hour or so, Mr. Rucastle suddenly remarked that it was time to commence the duties of the day, and that I might change my dress and go to little Edward in the nursery. 2 days after the same performance was I'd gone through the exact same similar circumstances. Again, I changed my dress and sat in the window, and again I laughed very heartily at the funny stories of which my employer had an immense repertoire, and which he told me intimately. Then he handed me a yellow-backed novel, and moving my chair a little sideways, that my own shadow might not fall upon the page, he begged me to read aloud to him. I read for about 10 minutes, beginning at the heart of the chapter. Then suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, he ordered me to cease and to change my dress. You can easily imagine, Mr. Holmes, how curious I was to become what was the meaning of this extraordinary performance could possibly be. They were always very careful, I observed, to turn my face away from the window, so that I became consumed with a desire to see what was going on behind my back. At first it seemed to be impossible, but I soon devised a means. My hand mirror had been broken, so a happy thought seized me, and I concealed a piece of the glass in my handkerchief. On the next occasion, in the midst of my laughter, I put my handkerchief up to my eyes. I was able to see a little management to see what was behind me. I confess I was disappointed. There was nothing. At least, that was my first impression. At a second glance, however, I perceived that there was a man standing in Southampton Road. A small, bearded man in a grey suit, who seemed to be looking in my direction. The road is an important highway, and there are usually people there. This man, however, was leaning against the railing that bordered our field, and was looking earnestly up. I lowered my handkerchief and glanced at Mrs. Rucastle to find her eyes fixed upon me with a most searching gaze. She said nothing, but I am convinced that she had divined that I had a mirror in my hand and had seen what was behind me. She rose at once. "Jeffro," she said, "there's an impertinent fellow on the road who stares up at Miss Hunter." "No friend of yours, Miss Hunter?" he asked. "No, I know no one in these parts." "Dear me, how very impertinent. Kindly turn around and motion him to go away." "Surely it would be better to take no notice." "No, no, we should have him loitering here always. Kindly turn around and wave him away like that." I did as I was told, and the same instant Miss Rucastle drew down the blind. That was a good week ago, and from that time I have not sat again in the window, nor have I worn the blue dress. nor seen the man in the road.
Pray continue, said Holmes. Your narrative promises to be most interesting to me.
You'll find it rather disconnected, I fear, and there may be proof of little relation between one story of the incidents in which I speak. On the very first day I was at Copper Breeches, Mr. Rucastle took me to a small outhouse which stands near the kitchen door. As we approached it, I heard a sharp rattling of a chain, and the sound of a large animal moving about. Look in here, said Mr. Rucastle, showing me a slit between the two planks. Is he not a beauty? I looked through and was very conscious of two glowing eyes, and of a vague figure huddled up in the darkness.
Don't be afraid, said my employer, laughing at the start I had given. It's only Carlo, my mastiff. I call him mine, but really old Toller, my groom, is the only man who can do anything with him. We feed him once a day, and not too much, so that he's always keen as mustard. Toller lets him loose at night, and God help any trespasser who lays his fangs upon him. For goodness sake, don't ever go on any pretext to set your foot outside the threshold at night, for it is as much as your life is worth.
The warning was no idle one, for 2 nights later I happened to look out my bedroom window at about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a beautiful moonlit night, and the lawn in front of the house was slivered over, and almost as bright as day. I was standing, wrapped in the peaceful beauty of the scene, when I was unaware that something was moving under the shadow of the copper beeches. As it emerged from the moonshine, I saw that it was a giant dog, as large as a calf, tawny tinted with a hanging jowl, black muzzle, and huge projecting bones. It walked slowly across the lawn and vanished into the shadow of the other side. That dreadful sentinel sent a chill in my heart which I do not think any burglar could have done. And now I have a very strange experience to tell you. I had, as you know, cut off my hair in London, but I had placed it in a great coil at the bottom of my trunk. One evening, after the child was in bed, I began to amuse myself by examining the furniture in my room and by arranging my own little things. There was an old chest of drawers in the room, and 2 upper ones that were empty and open, the lower one locked. I had filled the first 2 with my linen, and as much as I had to pack, I was naturally annoyed at not having use of the 3rd drawer. It struck me that it might have been fastened by mere oversight, so I took out a bunch of my keys and tried to open it. The very first key fitted it perfectly, and I drew the drawer open. There was only one thing in it, but I am sure that you would never guess that it was my own coil of hair. I took it up and examined it. It was the same particular tint and of the same thickness. But then the impossibility of the thing intruded itself on me. How could my hair have been locked in the drawer? With trembling hands I undid my trunk and turned out my contents, and drew from the bottom my own hair. I laid the 2 tresses together, and I assure you that they were identical. Was it not extraordinary? Puzzle as I would, I could not make anything out of what it meant. I returned the strange hair to the drawer, and I said nothing of the matter to the Rucastles, as I felt that I put myself in the wrong by opening the drawer which they had locked. I am naturally observant, as you may have remarked, Mr. Holmes, and I soon had a pretty good plan of the whole house in my head. There was one wing, however, which appeared not to be inhabited at all. The door which faced that which led into the quarters of the Tollers opened to the suite, but it was invariably locked. One day, however, as I ascended the stairs, I met Mr. Rucastle coming through this door, his keys in his hands, and coming out through this door. He had a look in his face which made him a very different person than the round, jovial man to whom I was accustomed. His cheeks were red, his brow was crinkled with anger, and his veins stood out on his temples with passion. He locked the door and hurried past me without a word or a look. This aroused my curiosity, so when I went out for walking the grounds with my charge, I strolled around to that side of the house which I could see the windows for this part of the house. There were 4 of them in a row, 3 of which were simply dirty, and the 4th was shuttered up. They were evidently all deserted. As I strolled up and down, glancing at them occasionally, Mr. Rucastle came out to me, looking as merry and jovial as ever. "Ah," he said, "you must not think me rude, as if I passed you without a word. My dear lady, I was preoccupied with a business matter." I assured him that I was not offended. "By the way," said I, "you seem to have quite a suite of spare rooms up there, and one of them has shutters up." He looked surprised, since it seemed to me a little startled by my remark. "Photography is one of my hobbies," he said. "I've made my darkroom up there. But, dear me, what an observant young lady we have come upon. Who would have believed it? Who would have ever believed it?" He spoke in a jesting tone, but there was no jest in his eyes. But he looked at me. I read suspicion there, and annoyance, but no jest. Well, Mr. Holmes, from that moment I understood that there was something in that suite of rooms which I was not to know. I was all on fire to go over to them. It was not mere curiosity, though I have my share of that. It was more a feeling of duty, a feeling that some good might come from penetrating that place. They talk of woman's instincts. Perhaps it was my woman's instincts which gave me that feeling. At any rate, it was there, and I was keenly at the lookout for any chance to pass that forbidden door. It was only yesterday that chance came. I may tell you that, besides Mr. Rucastle, both Toller and his wife find something to do in these deserted rooms, and I once saw him carrying a large linen bag with him through that door. Recently he was drinking hard, and yesterday evening he was very drunk. When I came upstairs, there was a key in the door. I had no doubt at all that it was left there. Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle were both downstairs, and the child was with them, so that I had an admirable opportunity. I turned the key gently in the lock, opened the door, and slipped through. There was a little passage in front of me, unpapered and uncarpeted, which turned at a right angle at the farther end. And round this corner were 3 doors in a line, third and first of which were open. They each led into little rooms, dusty and cheerless, with 2 windows in the one in the other, so thick with dirt that the evening light glimmered dimly through them. The center door was closed, and across the outside of it had been the fastened one with broad bars of the iron pad, a padlocked one at the end of a ring on the wall, and fastened at the other end with a stout cord. The door itself was locked as well, and the key was not there. The barricaded door corresponded clearly with a shuttered window outside, and yet I could see by the glimmer from beneath that the room was not in darkness. Evidently there was a skylight which let in room in the light. As I stood in the passage, gazing at the sinister door, and wondering what the secret was it might veil, I suddenly heard the sound of steps within the room, and saw a shadow pass backward and forward against the little slit of dim light shone out from under the door. A mad, unreasonable terror rose up in me at the sight, Mr. Holmes. My overstrung nerves failed me suddenly, and I turned and ran as though some dreadful hand were behind me, clutching at the skirt of my dress. I rushed down the passage, through the door, and straight into the arms of Mr. Rucastle, who was waiting outside. "So," he said, smiling, "it was you, then. I thought that it must be when I saw the door open." "Oh, I'm so frightened," I panted. My dear young lady, you cannot think how caressing and soothing his manner was. And what has frightened you, my dear young lady?" But his voice was a little too coaxing. He overdid it. I was keenly on my guard against him. "I was foolish enough to enter the ensign wing," I answered. "But it's so lonely and eerie in this dim light that I was frightened and ran out again. Oh, it is so dreadful still in there." "Only that," he said, looking at me keenly. Why, what did you think? I asked. Why do you think I locked this door? I'm sure that I do not know. It is to keep people out who have no business there. Do you see? He was still smiling in the most amiable manner. I'm sure if I had known. Well then, you now know, and if you ever put your foot over that threshold again. Here in an instant the smile hardened into a grin of rage, and he glared down at me with the face of a demon. I'll throw you to the mastiff. I was so terrified that I did not know what I did. I suppose that I must have rushed past him into my room. I remembered nothing until I found myself lying in my bed, trembling all over. Then I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. I could not live there any longer without some advice. I was frightened of the house, of the man, of the woman, of the servants, even of the child. They were all horrible to me. If I could only bring you down, all would be well. Of course, I might have fled from the house, but my curiosity was almost as strong as my fears. My mind was soon made up. I would send you a wire. I put on my hat and my cloak and went down to the office, which is about half a mile from the house. Then returned, feeling very much easier. A horrible doubt came into my mind as I approached the door, lest a dog might be loose, but I remembered that Toller had drunk himself into a state of insensibility that evening, and I knew that he was the only one in the household who had any influence with the savage creature, or who would venture to set him free. I slipped in safety and lay half awake during the night with my joy of the thought of seeing you. I had no difficulty in getting leave to come to Winchester this morning, but I must be back before 3 o'clock, for Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle are going on a visit, and will be away all evening, so that I must look after the child. Now I have told you my adventures, Mr. Holmes, and I should be very glad if you could tell me what to do, or what it all means, and above all, what I should do.
Holmes and I had listened spellbound by this extraordinary story. My friend rose now and paced up and down the room, his hands in his pockets. And an expression of the most profound gravity upon his face. Is Toller still drunk? He asked. Thanks for coming in.
Yes, I heard his wife tell Mrs. Rucastle that she could do nothing with him.
That is well. And the Rucastles go out tonight?
Yes.
Is there a cellar with a good strong lock?
Yes, the wine cellar.
You seem to me to have acted all this matter with a very brave and sensible girl, Miss Hunter. Do you think that you could perform one more feat? I should not ask it of you if I did not think you were a quite exceptional woman.
I will try. What is it?
We shall be at Copper Breeches by 7 o'clock, my friend and I. The Rucastles will be gone by that time, and Mr. Toller will, we hope, be incapable. There only remains Mrs. Toller, who might give an alarm. If you could send her into the cellar on some errand, and then turn the key upon her, you could facilitate matters immensely.
I will do it.
Excellent. We shall then look thoroughly into the affair. Of course, there is only one feasible explanation. You have been brought there to personate someone, and the real person is imprisoned in the chamber. That is obvious. As to who the prisoner is, I have no doubt that it is the daughter, Miss Alice Rucastle, if I remember right, who was said to have gone to America. You were chosen, doubtless, as resembling her height, figure, and the color of your hair. Hers have been cut off, very possibly in some illness, though which she has passed, and, of course, yours had to be sacrificed also. By a curious chance you came upon her stresses. The man in the road was undoubtedly a friend of hers, possibly her fiancé, and no doubt
You wore the girl's dress and were so like her that he was convinced of your laughter whenever he saw you. And afterwards, from your gesture, that Miss Rucastle was perfectly happy, and that she no longer desired his attentions. The dog is set loose at night to prevent him from endeavoring to communicate with her. So much is fairly clear. The most serious point of the case is the disposition of the child.
What on earth has that to do with it? I exclaimed.
My dear Watson, you as a medical man are continually gaining light as to the tendencies of a child by the study of the parents. Why don't you see that you converse things equally? I have frequently gained my first real insight to the character of the parents by studying their children. The child's disposition is abnormally cruel, merely by the cruelty's sake, and whether he derives this from his smiling father, I should suspect, or from his mother, it bodes evil for the poor girl who is in their power.
I'm sure that you are right, Mr. Holmes, cried our client. 1,000 things come back to me which make me certain that you have hit it. Oh, let us lose not an instant bringing up this poor child.
We must be circumspect, for we are dealing with a very cunning man. We can do nothing until 7 o'clock. At that hour we shall be with you, and it will not be long before we solve our mystery. We were good as our word, and for just at 7 we reached the Copper Beeches, having put up our trap at the wayside public house. A group of trees, with their dark leaves shifting like burnished metal in the light of the setting sun, were sufficient to mark the house, which had Miss Hunter not been standing smiling at the doorstep. "Have you managed it?" asked Holmes. A loud thudding noise came from somewhere downstairs.
That is Mrs. Toller in the cellar, she said. Her husband lies snoring in the kitchen rug. Here are his keys, which are the duplicates of Mr. Rucastle's.
"You have done well indeed," cried Holmes enthusiastically. "Now lead the way, and we shall see the end of this black business." We passed up the stairs and unlocked the door, followed down the passage, and found ourselves in front of the barricade which Miss Hunter had described. Holmes cut the cord and removed the traverse bar. Then he tried various keys in the lock, but without success. No sound came from within, and at the silence Holmes' face clouded over. "I trust that we are not too late," said he. "I think, Miss Hunter, that we had better go in without you. Now, Watson, put your shoulder to it, and we shall see whether we cannot make our way in." It was an old rickety door, and gave at once to our united strength. Together we rushed into the room. It was empty. There was no furniture save a little pallet bed, a small table, and a basket of linen. The skylight above was open, and the prisoner gone. "There has been some villainy here," said Holmes. "This beauty has guessed Miss Hunter's intentions, and has carried his victim off." "But how?" "Through the skylight. We shall soon see how he managed it." He swung himself up onto the roof. "Ah, yes," he cried. "Here's the end of a long light ladder against the eaves. That is how he did it."
"But it is impossible," said Miss Hunter. "The ladder was not there when the Rucastles went away."
"He has come back and done it. I tell you that he is such a clever and dangerous man, I should not be very surprised if these his steps are here now upon the stairs. I think, Watson, that it would be well as you to have your pistol ready." The words were hardly out of his mouth before a man appeared at the door of the room. Very fat, burly man, with a heavy stick in his hand. Miss Hunter screamed and shrunk against the wall at the sight of him, but Sherlock Holmes sprang forward and confronted him. "You villain," said he, "where is your daughter?" The fat man cast his eyes round and lit up at the skylight. "It is for me to ask you that," he shrieked. "You thieves! Spies and thieves! I've caught you, have I? You're in my power. I'll serve you." He turned and clattered down the stairs as hard as he could go. "He's gone for the dog," cried Miss Hunter. "I have my revolver," said I.
Better close the front door, cried Holmes. We all rushed down the stairs together. We had hardly reached the hall when we heard the baying of the hound, and then the scream of agony. With a horrible whirring sound which it was dreadful to listen to, an elderly man with a red face and shaking limbs came staggering out the side door. "My God!" he said. "Someone has loosed the dog! It's not been fed for 2 days! Quick, quick, or it'll be too late!" Holmes and I rushed out around the angle of the house, with Toller hurrying behind us. There was a huge, famished brute, its black muzzle buried in Rucastle's throat. While he writhed and screamed upon the ground, running up, I blew its brains out, and it fell over with the keen white teeth still meeting the great creases of his neck. With much labor, we separated him and carried him, living but horribly mangled, into the house. We laid him upon the drawing-room sofa, and having dispatched the sobered Toller to bear the news to his wife, I did what I could to relieve his pain. We were all assembled round him when the door opened, and a tall, gaunt woman entered the room. "Mrs. Toller!" cried Miss Hunter. "Yes, Miss. Mr. Rucastle let me out when he came back before he went up to you. Ah, miss, it is a pity you didn't let me know what you were planning, for I would have told you that your pains were wasted." "Ah," said Holmes, looking keenly at her. "It is clear that Mrs. Toller knows more about this matter than anyone else." "Yes, sir, I do, and I am ready enough to tell what I know." "Then pray sit down and let us hear it, for there are several points on which I must confess that I am still in the dark." "I will soon make it clear to you," she said, "and I'd have done so before now if I could have got out from the cellar. If there's police court business over this, you'll remember that I was the one who stood your friend, and that I was Miss Alice's friend too. She was never happy at home, Miss Alice wasn't, from that time that her father married again. She was slighted like they had no say in anything, but it was never really bad for her before they came to meet Mrs. Fowler at the friend's house. As well as I could learn, Miss Alice had rights of her own by will, but she was never quiet and patient. She was that she never said a word about them, but she just left everything in Mr. Rucastle's hands. He knew he was safe with her, but when there was a chance of a husband coming forward who would ask for all that law would give him, then her father thought it was time to put a stop to it. He wanted her to sign a paper so that whether she married or not, he could use her money. When she wouldn't do it, he kept on worrying her until she got brain fever, and for 6 weeks she was at death's door. Then she got better at last, all sworn to a shadow, and with her beautiful hair cut off, but that didn't make no change in her young man, and he stuck to her as true as a man could." "Ah," said Holmes, "I think that would have been good enough to tell us makes the fairly clear, and that I can deduce all that remains. Miss Rucastle, then, I presume, took to this system of imprisonment." "Yes, sir." "And brought Miss Hunter down from London in order to get rid of the disagreeable persistence of Mr. Fowler." "That was it, sir." "But Mr. Fowler, being a persevering man, and a good seaman, should blockaded the house, and having met you succeeded by certain arrangements, metallic or otherwise, in convincing you that your interests were the same as his." "Mr. Fowler was a very kind-spoken and free-handled gentleman," said Miss Toller serenely. "And in this way he managed that your good man should have no want of drink, and that the latter should be ready at the moment when your master had gone out." "You have it, sir, just as it happened." "I'm sure we owe you an apology, Mrs. Toller," said Holmes, "for you have certainly cleared up everything which puzzled us. And here comes the country surgeon and Miss Rucastle, so I think, Watson, that we had best escort Miss Hunter back to Winchester, as it seems to me that our locus standi is now a rather questionable one. And thus was solved the mystery of the sinister house with the copper breeches in front of the door. Mr. Rucastle survived, but was always a broken man, kept alive solely by the care of his devoted wife. They still live with their old servants, who probably know much more of Rucastle's life that he finds it difficult to depart from them. Mr. Fowler and Miss Rucastle were married, by special license, in Southampton the day after their flight, and he is now the holder of a government's appointment in the land of Mauritius. As to Miss Violet Hunter, my friend Holmes, rather to my disappointment, manifested no further interest in her when once she had ceased to be the centre of his problems, and she is now head of a private school in Walsall, where I believe that she has met with considerable success. Oh, and the voices. Oh. Okay, just claim third. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Okay, well, that ends the first half of this book. So that would be the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, now concluded. Next week we will get into the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Or should we say the Memoirs of John Watson? But for the meantime, let us see who we can raid. Or if anyone has any suggestions, I'll gladly take them. I don't see any of my fellow readers on right now. Let's see. No, take it back. I see some of the readers, but they're not reading. They're playing games. Evie is playing Mass Effect. I think she's up to Mass Effect 3 now. Legendary Edition anyway. Who else is on? Chaplain Rex is playing Gundam. Let's see. Okay, I just saw words go. Oh, thought I saw someone. Must have just gone off. So again, if anyone has any suggestions, I will gladly consider them. I really need to get music. Page's on. I haven't rated them before. See what they're doing real quick. They're playing Library of Runia. I have no idea what that one is about. Actually, it looks like it's an interesting game. So, yeah, let's rate index. Well, page. Okay. So, I do have raid notifications if you want to use them. I have one for followers. I have one for subscribers. We are going to raid the next page that typed in, so I can hopefully get this stuff done. Let's see. Why is the raid notification not going? Okay. Do they have raids turned off? Okay, well, they're not going to let me raid. I've got 3 people. I will raid Sarah. Make sure I got everything typed right again. Okay, where's Sarah's? Don't tell me Sarah just went off. Really? Yeah. Sarah just went off. Great. Well, let's see if it'll let me read EB. Really? Won't let me read EB either? Hell. Why do people turn off their rating abilities? That's just crazy. No, I don't have any raid suggestions. Check one more person before. What is Polly doing? Polly is playing Polly's playing Pokemon. Okay, let's try Polly. Eventually, we'll get a raid here. Did I spell it right? Will we find out? Hello? Is that letting me raid anyone? What the hell? Try this one more time, just see if. Nothing. Well, what the hell? No one is letting me raid them. That is craziness. Well, maybe we'll just catch a Pokemon since we took so long. Okay. One last try to raid. Just for the hell of it. Will this one go through? Really? Okay, it's not letting me raid. That is just freaking wonky. I've tried 5 different people to raid. And it's not taking any of them. Okay, let's... I tried that. Stubby. Anything? Anything? Ah, what the hell? That is just damn annoying. Okay, let me see if there's... Ah, what the hell? That is just... I don't know, guys. So I guess we're not going to raid, because I can't find anyone to freaking raid. Well, let's do... It's just... I don't know what's going on, man. It's just weird. I mean, I hate to just close out, because that's... I don't know. This feels wrong. So anyone still lurking want to suggest someone I can try? This is just... I don't know what's going on, man. Hold on. Let me try Coda. Just let me see if it'll... If I can spell their name right. Let's see. Kota Misletter. Shizukama. Okay. They're playing Legend of Zelda. And check on them real quick to make sure everything's going. See how long they've been on. I guess it must have just come on. Oh, they've been on an hour or two, so. Oh, let's rate them. Oh, come on. Are raids just not working? What the heck? Yes, this one. Okay, now it's gonna let me do it. That's crazy. Anyway, I got the message, so let's finally get this raid done. So I will hopefully see you all tomorrow for fairy tales, and if not, then possible random gaming this weekend. But until then, have a good evening, afternoon, morning, good night, whichever it may be. I will see you later. Really? Don't want to do it here either. Really strange. Okay, let's figure out why this raid thing's not working. Do it.